Hello and welcome to the show. Now, the subject of fuel economy tends not to particularly excite many car enthusiasts. Truth be told, is often associated with fairly bland eco-boxes. However, when it comes to motorsport, it can certainly still prove very, very important. If you have a car that can run just that little bit longer than your rivals, it opens up a world of possibilities. Hell, I've seen NASCAR races that have been decided upon some very clever fuel strategies. I remember a V8 supercar race here at Yas Marina where Courtney was desperately holding on in the closing stages of a race with the car very much running out of fuel, but he made it work and went on to take a victory. There can be some fascinating, some highly exciting battles centered around fuel economy because somebody's car can run that little bit longer than others. Now, when it comes to Forza, while it does simulate the various efficiencies of cars, different vehicles will burn through fuel at different rates and different driving styles will make a difference. Some of the tactical elements, not quite so much. You can't choose the amount of fuel that goes into the car. They always started with a full tank, And if we were to do a race about trying to, well, make a tank of fuel last as long as possible, it would be rather long and quite boring. So instead, what we are going to do is see who can empty their tank as quickly as possible. Now, this throws up a whole heap of tactical problems of its own, because, as I said, every car starts with a full tank of fuel. However, not every car's fuel tank is the same size. So, a car like this Mazda RX-8, for example, might not be particularly good when it comes to the fuel economy. Believe me, I know. Even this massively modified one, for example, will burn through many fuels. The miles per gallon will be incredibly low. However, it does have a decent sized tank, so it does take a while to drain it. Engine swaps are often a very big no-no with this. The quad rotor, for example, yes, it is a very thirsty engine, however, it comes from the 787B, and that was a car that went on to win Le Mans, a car with an endurance racing fuel tank. You put that in an RX-8 or an RX-7 or any of the other vehicles that the quad rotor will go in, and while yes, it will not be doing very many miles a gallon whatsoever, it takes a long time to drain through the tank. You want a high-powered car with a very small fuel tank. You might also think SUVs are a good way to go. Of course, they are horrendously unaerodynamic. Miles a gallon are again very, very low, but take cars like this Bentayga, like a Hummer, for example. Yes, the Hummer may only get a couple of miles a gallon, however, once more, it is a massive fuel tank that goes into the vehicle. So, picking a car? Quite a difficult decision. Now, we were going to be building these vehicles up into S-Class, and that gives you plenty of options to try and go for, and there are various tactics as well that you can try, various ways of tuning the cars that you can try to just squeeze out that little bit, well, more fuel, burn the waste that bit more fuel, give the car maximum amount of aerodynamic downforce. More drag makes the car hopefully less efficient in terms of fuel. Make the vehicles as heavy as possible. You don't want weight reduction in your car if you could help it, because the heavier the vehicle, the more fuel it's going to be burning. Now, the car I opted to use was the Lamborghini Countach. Now, I tried building all sorts of cars for this challenge. I had the RX-8, I had the Charger Hellcat, I had a couple of Hondas as well. However, nothing would surpass the Lamborghini. Now, the Countach represents the old guard, if you like. We have run this test in Forza games in the past, and the Countach was very, very good indeed. It never quite won, but it did do very well, and of all the vehicles I built for this, and I ran out of money building cars for this, the Lamborghini was the best. My Honda CRX and an Integra got very close. Not quite as good as the Lamborghini, but it actually get very close, with I imagine, fairly small fuel tanks and a decent amount of power out of their standard engines, despite them being considerably lighter than the Lamborghini. Either way, we got a grid of cars together, and these would be the challengers We've got a Lamborghini Reventon going for the big supercar approach. BMW i8, I think engine swapped in that one. I'm not sure. I'm not sure about the tactics from the BMW, but they were going to give something different a try. Somebody else did bring a Charger Hellcat. A TVR Sagaris was in this. Jaguar? Now, the XJ, a little bit of a wild card in all of this. A car that I don't think loaded for the replay. Now, the little Polaris buggies were an unusual addition to see. However, hoping for a small fuel tank. Lancia Delta S4 as well. There's another empty grid spot. Two cars with V8 racing engines, the Alfa Romeo 155 and an R31 Skyline. Engine swap's a brave choice, but the hope was again a small fuel tank. A second of the Polaris buggies. Another big Lamborghini, this time the Aventador. Someone braved the SUV route with the Jeep Wagoneer. My Lamborghini Countach. A big Shelby Mustang, again, huge power. A lot of these cars were running 600-700 horsepower. Ford Fairlane, I think, get up towards 900 horsepower. There was a Holden Ute, a little Honda S800 going for the lower power but tiny fuel tank route, and at the back, an AMC Pacer. So, the question was, which of these cars was going to be able to empty their tank of fuel the fastest? Now, to do this, the race was set up to be 22 minutes long. Now, we knew cars were going to be running out. The Victor would have run out of fuel by the end of 22 minutes. I didn't want to have the race going on for too long because I didn't want to risk the replay breaking. The longer the races go, the more likely it is for the replays to have issues. So yeah, 22 minutes, a good compromise. Of course, everybody is racing around the track at the same time, which means off of the line it is all going to be fairly busy. One of the buggies is a little bit wide out in the sand, not quite where you want to be. And it is very important that you find yourself some clean air. You don't really want to be stuck in traffic during all of this. The Skyline gets bounced across the curb because you're coming up to a corner. You know, you're going too wide into a corner. You're going to wait longer, perhaps, to get on the throttle. You're going to be off throttle for maybe that little bit longer. And every second that you can be at full throttle, every second that you can be burning petrol is going to be important here. And also, you don't want to be sat in anyone's slipstream. I was surprised to see the number of cars. It's an instinctive thing. It's an instinctive thing when we're racing to, you know, sit in the slipstream with the car ahead. But that's not going to help you in terms of burning fuel. It's only going to be a tiny, tiny little bit, but the end of the journey is only a tiny little bit. So, yeah, you really do want to try and stay out of the slipstream as much as possible. I was trying a different tactic with my Countach, which involved weaving my way down the straights, keeping the car flat out, but weaving my way down the straights makes that distance just ever so slightly longer as you are going around the lap. Of course, not the easiest thing to do when there are other vehicles around. You have to kind of pick and choose your moments to do it when there weren't cars sort of trying to find ways past you. And when you are going at quite high speeds down these Monza straights, you've got to be careful you don't put a wheel on the grass. There were a couple of times where things got a little bit dicey in the big Lamborghini as the Ute goes for a very, very big slide around the Parabolica. Yeah, you will certainly see from me, and a few cars did cotton onto it later on, very much trying to avoid sitting in any car's slipstream as we head down the start-finish straight. The little Polaris buggy was monstrously quick in a straight line. Now, I'm not 100% sure if they were running their standard engines or V8 racing engines put in those. I believe that I was told they were swapped, although the telemetry shows them as running CVTs, which they couldn't do with their normal engines. So, yeah, not quite sure what was going on with the buggies, but there we go. I also managed to put my car in reverse around the first corner, which didn't really help matters. I'm going to be honest, didn't really help matters. Now, one of the other tactics that we have seen talked about, shall we say, when we've run this test in the past, is why wouldn't you just drift your way around the circuit? Now, I did do this in testing, and the Jaguar was certainly very powerful and struggling a lot in terms of grip, whether it was intended initially or not. Very quickly, the Jaguar was going sideways just about everywhere. There is a problem, though. There is a problem with doing this. Well, yes, over the course of the lap, it will burn more fuel. The simple reason being is you are on power through bits of a corner where you perhaps wouldn't be if you were driving them normally. However, the catch is, it destroys your rear tyres. And if the rear tyres happen to give way before you run out of fuel, you're in a lot of trouble. Now, with these being S-Class, most of the cars here were being run on race tyres. Race tyres disintegrate pretty rapidly on the vehicles. The on-track action continued. Now, we knew it was going to be a little while before we started to see any of the cars conking out. Again, with them starting on a full tank of fuel, it was going to be a while until we saw stuff start to break down, which means that we have a Lancia very nearly doing a wheelie coming out of the parabolic. That's not a normal thing you see going on at Monza. The cars don't normally wheelie coming out of the Parabolica. The Delta S4, notorious with its quite soft suspension. This, the Group B version of the car. An unusual choice of vehicle. I would have thought the Lancia would have had a pretty sizable fuel tank. But again, you never quite know which cars are going to suddenly end up being good with all of this. The Polaris buggies continued to be a nuisance, making a hideous noise and being very, very quick down the straights, although not the easiest thing either to drive. And a lot of these cars weren't particularly nice to drive. The challenge was all about having the vehicles burn through their tanks, and, well, that subsequently meant you built cars in slightly different, slightly unusual manners, if you like. My Lamborghini, yeah, it wasn't amazingly fast. Was kind of in and around this group of buggies and with the Lancia. Now, I was trying sneaky tactics. I'll be honest, I was trying sneaky tactics. I was trying to give the vehicles behind me some slipstream. Like, if there was a car behind me, I would try and make sure that my vehicle was in front of it, just to try and make them run a little bit more in the draft. In the end, well, it's like karma got me. I ballsed it up over a curb somewhere. And that was that for the Lamborghini. But yeah, if there was a possibility, if there was an option to give the car behind me some slipstream, I was trying my best to make sure I was being helpful to myself more than anything. But there we go. Yeah, I was a fair way back, and we were finding ourselves fighting a little bit more than we would have ideally liked at this stage. Again, we're being a little bit slow through the chicane. It's only, it's costed us a bit in terms of time, but it's that off throttle for a little longer than normal that was the concern. Having been racing for getting on the 16-minute mark, still everybody was running, although that was about to change. The first of the cars, amazingly, to conk out would be the Skyline. The Skyline fitted with the V8 racing engine, the engine from the Ariel Atom, that would cough and splutter its way out of the race around the first corner. But still, that was 16 minutes. 16 minutes it had taken for the Skyline to drain its engine. We were surprised to see the engine swap cars going. In previous times, the engine swapped option was not a great choice, but the V8 racing engine was enough to, or a small enough tank to conk out at a very, very similar time. At a very similar time to the Skyline letting go, it would be one of the Polaris buggies that would go next. Now, this perhaps a little bit less surprising. In fact, we were very much expecting to see the Polaris take victory here. We were surprised when it was the Skyline that stopped. Now, the vehicles run out of fuel a little differently in this to what we've seen in previous Forza games. They kind of have a brief period of kind of coughing and spluttering where they're still just about working, but not sort of at full capacity before they then do eventually then completely conk out, as we see with the Polaris here. So, yeah, it's a little bit stranger way. I say a little bit stranger, that's a little bit more normal way. It's certainly different compared to a previous games, as the Polaris would roll its way to a halt down the back straight. We'd also have some problems with the replay being a bit glitchy with cars ghosting in and out, so I apologise for those. Now, the next vehicle to let go, well, that would also be the second of the Polaris buggies. That would let go at a very similar point, but a lap later than his counterpart, as my Lamborghini would squeeze around the outside. You can see the Lamborghini off, weaving its way down the road in the distance. We weren't massively surprised. We weren't massively surprised by the buggies giving up. Slight laggy replays again, doing strange things. But, yeah, the buggies going second and third, not a huge surprise to anybody. because of their small fuel tanks and, yeah, you know, running an aggressive race around here. Fourth, well, that would go to another of the V8 racing engine swaps, the Alfa Romeo 155. That would drink through all of its petrol. Again, nowhere near as quickly as the Skyline. Now, the Skyline had not been driving in any massively, vastly different sort of way. It hadn't been sideways everywhere through the corners, wasn't sitting in the rev limiter, buzzing it the entire way round. However, the Skyline, yeah, conked out a lap sooner than the Alfa Romeo. Not quite sure why in particular. Two cars with exactly the same engine. Why that Skyline would let go. But the Alfa ran out of fuel at a really awkward point. It's kind of trying to pull it to a halt as best he could on the inside of the track, trying not to cause any chaos. It's not a great place to have to be stuck, but it was largely out of the way. Now this was, you know, this group of cars were all falling out at around and about the 18 or so minute mark. The Shelby Mustang, that was the next one to let go as well here. Just a few corners further down the road than that Alfa Romeo. Now, you will notice a Ford Fairlane. Now, the Fairlane was trying the cruise around, buzzing the limiter in a low gear tactic as the Mustang comes past, despite the fact the Mustang very much giving out, or giving up, very running out of fuel in that car. Yeah, the whole buzz the limiter tactic wasn't actually really working much better for the Fairlane than some of the other vehicles. And, yeah, sure enough, the Shelby, that would at least find a better place to pull up than the Alfa Romeo. The next vehicle to go, that would be my Lamborghini. Again, continuing to be a pretty solid choice of car if you want to burn through your tank of fuel very well indeed. It survived a little bit longer than the Alfa Romeo, a little bit longer than the Mustang, but not a huge amount. Again, we're talking around the 18-19 minute mark is where we were seeing these cars give up. They're just running out of fuel. The TVR, that was still going in the background, and as I was busy conking out down this next straight, the TVR would come to say hello. The TVR trying sort of slithering around, keeping his foot down and whatnot, but yeah, that would be it for the Lamborghini, while amazingly the Sagaris, yeah, that would continue on its way. It had taken us longer. And we still, you know, as we're getting towards the 20-minute mark, we were still not seeing a huge amount of cars out of the race. I will say, you know, the Countach was my best built car here. The Hondas would probably have conked out a minute or so later than the Lamborghini. The rest were struggling to empty their tanks. The big Lamborghinis, they weren't. They were not emptying their tanks around this circuit. They were trying everything to burn through fuel. Very, very sideways stuff from the Lambos in a desperate attempt to get through the fuel as much as possible. But they were still going. And by the time we got to the end of the 22 minutes, yep, the Lamborghinis, they were still running. Even, you know, sliding it through the corners, you'll have the car buzzing the limiter in places where you wouldn't normally, trying to waste fuel. Wasn't enough. The Wagoneer, that was still going. The SUV tactic, while it has all the aerodynamical properties of a barn, it still kept on going. Again, many horsepower in this. I think it had a V8 swap of some description, certainly to get it towards S-Class and to get it with a ridiculous amount of power. It wasn't a racing V8 in that one, but yeah, even the normal V8s wasn't enough to burn through the tank. The Ute, yep, that kept going. A 900 horsepower Holden Ute, and that couldn't burn through all of its tank either in the 22 minutes required. I would imagine perhaps it's down to the decent size fuel tank in that car. The BMW, unsurprisingly perhaps, that one was still going. I think by the sound of it, it might have the V10 swap in it, but that certainly didn't drain through its tank. I mean, the actual normal i8 does have a very tiny fuel tank, with the engine only being a generator, I think, with the car. But the swap puts the tank in it, and you've also got to bear in mind the i8 is very, very streamlined. So, yeah, that one didn't die. The Honda, yep, that kept going. The little S800, the plan with the small fuel tank, the hope with the small fuel tank, wasn't enough to get this car to run out. This was another car that was going for the weaving around on the straights technique, trying to make the car run out of fuel. The Jag, that was continuing going. The Jag was a monster down the straights. It was absurdly fast down the straights, incredibly difficult to drive. Now, the Jaguar was going for the drifty technique. However, the Jaguar did run out of tyres. In fact, the Jaguar shredded its rear tyres long before the tank was dry, and shredded its rear tyres right in front of the Honda, who had to have a panic jump on the brakes as smoke billows off the Jag that has finally, well, given up. As I given up, the tyres have given up on the Jag as it ended up clonking the wall and going for a spin. And I mean, utterly given up in terms of the tyres. When you hit 100% tyre wear on the car, your vehicle is undrivable. It's completely and utterly undrivable. And when you get to this stage, you can't really, well, burn fuel very well. I guess you are at least full throttle most of the places with just ludicrous amounts of wheel spin, but you have no control in the car. The replays are all bugged at this point. I apologise for that one, but there should be tyre smoke, there you go, pouring off the back of the Jaguar. It doesn't turn, it doesn't really do anything, and, well, yeah, that was that. The downside of trying to slide the cars around to get them to burn fuel, the tyres give up. When you've got it, obviously the Jag had a bigger fuel tank than expected, and yeah, the fuel tank outlived the tyres. Elsewhere, the Pacer, yeah, that one would keep going as well. We've done this in the past. I don't think we've ever had as many cars as this survive. Just survive. There was a lot of desperation going on in these closing stages. You saw the Ute in the background going very sideways, just trying frantically to find ways to conk out the Hellcat. The Charger Hellcat ran right up until the very end. It did finally conk out. Also the Fairlane, well, the replay got very laggy when the Fairlane conked out. That did conk out, but it was quite a long time after my Lamborghini, so it's Buzz the Limiter technique did kind of work, but nowhere near as efficiently as some of the other ones. The Charger, that did finally let go, but that was getting right close to the end of the race. It was the last of the cars. Only seven vehicles, I think, conked out around this race. We were trying to be terrible with our cars. We were trying to burn through a fuel tank. However, it turns out it's more difficult than expected. Now, I should say there were a couple of rules when it came to selecting the cars. We didn't allow, well, we ran these in S-Class, we didn't allow the Rallycross cars to run because, realistically, they would be what everyone goes for because they burnt through their tanks in about 13 minutes. Equally, we didn't allow the Hoonigan or the Fast and Furious cars to be run in the past. We have seen those sort of special edition cars have ridiculously tiny fuel tanks, and for the sake of a little bit of competition in this, there were some overpowered cars, if you like, that were disallowed. However, with the more normal cars, it's surprisingly difficult to get them to burn through their tanks quick enough. It's really surprisingly difficult to get them to burn through that petrol. The Countach was good, but was no match for a Skyline fitted with a V8 racing engine. I'm not sure we've learned a huge amount, but it was quite interesting to see what vehicles would manage to dump their fuel quick enough. Yeah, the Polaris buggies were expected to be good, but amazingly, we found something that was even better. That, though, is going to be it for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.